Edit mode offers many more ways of selecting elements than we have available in object mode. To demonstrate some of these new options, we'll start with a UV sphere. With the sphere selected, we'll press Tab to enter Edit mode. By default, we will be selecting vertices. But by clicking on the other options here, we can change to edges or faces, or even by holding down the Shift key as we click, a combination of these. As a general rule, holding down the Shift key while selecting will add to the current selection. Without the Shift key, any new selection replaces the previous selection. The first of the advanced selection techniques allows us to quickly select a circle or line of elements. If we hold down the Alt key and click on an edge very close to the left or right side of a vertex, Blender will automatically select all the vertices in that horizontal ring. If we click just above or below the vertex while holding down the Alt key, half a vertical loop will be selected. The reason only half of the loop is selected is that Blender can only continue the loop where the vertices are part of a quad face. As soon as it selects a vertex belonging to a tri- or n-gon, it can go no further. But we can easily select the second half of our loop by holding down the Shift and Alt keys, in combination, allowing us to add to the current selection. If we change to Edge selection, we can select the edges of a ring or loop in the same way as before. Another option available exclusively to Edge selection is to hold down Ctrl and Alt together, and this will allow us to select a ring of vertical edges, or a half loop of horizontal edges. Include the Shift key to select the second part of the loop. As we can see, the two options give entirely different results. When we switch to face selection, clicking to the left or right of a face creates a horizontal ring, while clicking on the top or bottom of the face creates part of a vertical loop. But the loop doesn't select the tri-faces at the top or bottom of the sphere. When attempting to select a loop of faces, Blender can only select quads. But we can complete the loop by holding down the Shift key on its own and selecting the faces missing from our loop. Selecting a circle of vertices, edges, or faces is also possible in other mesh geometries. For example, here we've held down the Alt key and clicked near a vertex to select a circle of elements around the bottom of a cylinder. Where a mesh has border edges, as with a plane, holding down Alt when clicking on an element will select a straight line. The next selection method allows us to select a path of elements between 2 points. To demonstrate, we'll first return to Vertex selection. We start by clicking on the vertex at one end of the path, and then, holding down the Ctrl key, click on the other end of the path. Blender will work out the shortest path between the 2 points and add the appropriate elements to the current selection. The path can be extended by continuing to hold down the Ctrl key and clicking on another element. The shortest path option also works for edges and for faces. When we use the shortest path selection, the Last Op panel offers us several options. When selecting vertices, the first option is Face Stepping. If this box is checked, then the path may make use of diagonal options. If Topology Distance is checked, then Blender chooses the path determined by the minimum number of elements that have to be selected rather than the shortest distance between the two ends. Fill Region, when checked, treats the start and end points as the corners of a rectangle, if possible, and selects all the elements within that area. Deselected and selected values define a pattern of selected and unselected elements along the path. For example, if both these parameters are set to 1, then we create a 1-on, 1-off pattern. With deselected set to 2, we have a 1 on and 2 off pattern. Offset pushes the pattern forward when using positive values or back when using negative values. If we are selecting a shortest path involving edges, then the last top panel has an additional parameter labeled Edge Tag. This is a drop-down list which allows us to mark the selected edges as a specific edge type. We'll cover the purpose of each of these types in future videos. To demonstrate another selection method, we'll start with a grid. The term border is used to describe any edge that is attached to a single face. If we hold down the Alt key while clicking on a border edge, all the edges along that line will be selected. And if we double-click, all the contiguous border edges will be selected. However, any other border edges that are not directly attached along this path must be selected separately. We can add the inner border edges to the current selection by holding down the key combination Shift-Alt while clicking on one of the currently unselected border edges. The vertices that define the border edges can also be selected using Alt and Shift-Alt. There is no option specifically for selecting faces around borders. The area we select can be expanded to adjacent elements by pressing Ctrl and the plus sign on the numpad. Exactly what area we end up selecting using this technique depends on our starting selection and the geometry of the mesh. Here we can see a few examples on both a plane and a sphere. Ctrl and the numpad's minus sign reduces the selection. We can also invert our selection, changing selected elements to unselected ones and unselected ones to selected. This is done using the key combination Ctrl-I. This option can be useful when we want to select most of the elements in a mesh. We can just select the ones we don't want and then invert the selection. When an object is made up of 2 or more meshes that have been joined using Ctrl-J. You may remember we did this in video 26 when creating our axes set model. The individual meshes that make up the object are sometimes referred to as islands, since there is no common connecting edge between each mesh. When in edit mode, we can select any of these separate meshes by moving the mouse pointer into any location within the island to be selected and pressing L. As we can see from this example, the eyes of Suzanne are separate meshes from the remainder of the head.